I want to welcome you to Game Dev Day, and now we're going to try and get our screen transitions to work. We've already taken care of the hero moving left and right, up and down, so we've taken care of what's going to happen when he moves from one screen to another. But now it's time to get the screen transitions to work. So the first thing we got to do is we have to create an interface. Now remember, an interface is the same as a contract. Any class that implements the interface we're going to create here is under obligation to implement the method that's inside of this interface or inside of this contract. So you're going to type in, you're going to create a file, a Java file called HeroListener.java. Remember, everything's case sensitive, so it has to be typed in exactly as you see it. So public interface HeroListener. And the method inside, which has no implementation, it's just a declaration, is public void screen transition. It's a method which takes two parameters. It takes an integer called current screen, and it takes a direction just called D. So in other words, when the screen walks to the east, we want to get rid of the current screen and load up the screen that's to the east of where we were before, vice versa, okay? So pause the video, get this typed up, saved, compiled, make sure it runs, and now let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. In what we're doing right now, we're not going to use this new class called Hero Event, but we may need it in the future. That's the only reason I'm giving it to you now. So create a Java file called HeroEvent.java, type it exactly as you see it, and then save it, compile it, make sure everything works, and at least for what we're doing now, that's the last time you're going to see it. Go ahead and pause the video. And now it's time to get into the nitty-gritty. So I've opened up the Hero class, and what we need to do is add in a new set of instance variables. And this is called a set. And it's a set of what? It's a set of hero listeners is what it's going to be. Now, for our purposes, we're only going to have one. The way a set works is, think of a set as like a collection or a bag of things. But you can never put two things that have the same value into the set. So if I was putting numbers into a set, I couldn't put two numbers that are the same. It wouldn't allow that. A set can only have elements that are unique. So I could never put two listeners that are exactly the same into the set. So what you're going to do is you're going to type private set and then hero listener in these brackets, these special symbols, and then the identifier is called listeners. And so we've created the hero listener class. This is going to hold all of our listeners, is what this is going to do. So that has to come before the constructor, is where that has to happen. Mine is on line 29, okay? Now, go into the constructor, and then after the catch statement, this is when we instantiate our set of listeners. So you're going to say listeners equals new hash set, which is a kind of set, hero listener, and then parens, empty parens, semicolon. Get that typed in exactly as you see it. We're going to have to make two new import statements to make this work. So we're going to have to import, let me find it first, right here on line 14, java.util.set, and we're going to have to import java.util.hashSet. Okay, now it's time to move over to the handler class. So handler is going to implement hero listener, so you have to add in implements hero listener, okay? Now because it's implementing hero listener, it's now under obligation to implement the methods that are in that contract or that interface. Well, we only have one screen transition. So if I go to handler, I say implements hero listener. That's all I need to do there. But now what I need to do is a couple things. I'm now under obligation to handle screen transition. And so let's talk about how this works. So down here, my line is 208. It's still inside of the class, so here's the ending curly brace. Now, please don't just pause the video and start typing things out. I want to explain this to you first, okay? So it's public void screen transition, takes in a number, which is the current screen, takes in a direction called D. Then what I have to do is I have to find a way to go through all of the game objects that I currently have. Remember, we've studied the handler class out the nose. You've had 4 quizzes on it now. And this is one of the reasons why. So that you know that object is an array list of game objects. Okay? So we create an iterator, which is a way of managing or going through one at a time each of the game objects. So we create that iterator, and as long as the iterator has something next, we look at what it has. We create a game object, or a temp object, which is a game object. And if that ID of the game object happens to be screen, that's the old screen. Now there's only one of them there. So once it finds the screen, it removes the screen. That part's done. So that's the whole point of this while loop. Gets rid of the old screen. That's it. That's all it does. Now what if D equals direction.north? What that means is that the hero went north, so we have to load the northern screen. Well, what I'm going to do then is I'm going to increment current screen, and it's going to increment the columns value in the class called world map. We may not have created that yet. So now let's save what you currently have, and let's move over to the world map. It's actually a very short Java file. So if you don't have this Java file, go ahead and create it. It's going to be worldmap.java. It has 2 static final variables. Rows, all caps, which is 8. Calls, all caps, which is 8. Because remember, our world is 8 screens by 8 screens. That's all it is. So go ahead, type that up, compile it, and once you have, let's go back to the handler class. So if I go north, I'm going to add 8 columns to that number. So for example, if I'm on screen 2 and I'm going north, I want my character to load on screen 10 is where I want him to be. If I go south, I subtract the number of columns. East and west is actually pretty easy. If I go east, the current screen is incremented by 1. And if I go west, the current screen is taken down by 1. Now what I do is I change the static variable current screen in the screen class to the current screen. So what that does is that sets the new current screen. So the old one is now gone, it's been offloaded. Now it's time to create a new screen. Based on what? Well, here's the path. Text folder, screens folder, screen, and then remember our screens are named screen0.txt, screen1.txt, screen2.txt, and so on and so forth. So this is concatenation at its best. So I'm going to add in that number, .txt, 11 rows by 16 columns. The tiles are 32 pixels wide, so that creates the screen. And then I simply add that new screen into I get the tile sets first, and I create this, adventure.tilesets.getTileset, and then current screen. What that does is that takes the tile set that we're using for our screens, passes that into the constructor for screen, and then I give the ID number, current screen, to the new screen. And then the only thing left to do is to add the new screen at position 0, which will be the first position in the object array list. And that adds in the new screen. Is it going to work yet? No, it's not going to work yet. There's some more things to type in. But that's the guts of what has to happen. Okay? Now, let's talk about, let me scroll back up. You can pause the video right here if you need this part. So go ahead and pause the video. And now let me scroll down. right there. Pause the video if you need this part. And then I don't think I have anything else except that closing brace right there. So that should be the complete screen transition file. Okay? Not done yet. Because what needs to happen is when my handler class adds a hero into the game object, into the object array list, that's when we have to create the listener. Listeners are objects that are created, and they wait around for certain events to occur. So let's go back. Let me scroll up here to the part where we create everything, when we instantiate everything here. Right. There's screen, get screen, remove object, push object, add object right here. Perfect. So right here in these two methods. So you've got two synchronized methods. Both are called add object, but the first one just puts the object we're adding in at the end of the array list. The second one allows us to put the game object that we're putting in any position we want. So it doesn't have to be at the end. And what you need is you need a condition inside. And so what you do is you get the object that you're passing in. And if the ID is player, what you do is you cast that object into a hero object and you add the hero listener right there. So you say dot add hero listener this. So both of your add object methods should look like this right here. We have to have the ability to add the hero listener and to remove the hero listener. So if we remove the hero, we need to remove any hero listeners that might be there. We don't want those listeners sitting in the background doing nothing, taking up memory. So pause the video if you need to. Get your code to look like this. All right. We're going to move now back to the hero class because what we need to do is we need to create the add hero listener method and the remove hero listener method. So let's go ahead and scroll down. And there we go. So I've got three methods here. The first two are exactly what I said. The first one, this has to go in the hero class. Add hero listener. It takes a parameter, a hero listener, which is named listener, and it adds that to listeners, which is the set that we created earlier. Remove hero listener takes a listener, and it removes that from the set that we created listener. Okay. What is this guy right here? Fire screen transition. When the hero touches the top of the screen, the hero class cannot communicate with the screen class. They're two separate entities, okay? But the handler class has signed a contract. It has agreed to implement the method inside the hero listener interface. It's made that contract, that agreement. So what we do is we create a fire method. Fire methods are methods that are triggered when certain events happen. So when do I use this method? Well, let me go to the hero tick method real quick here. Let's scroll up. Let's go to the tick method. And let me find the section. There we go. This is when we controlled the hero, right? So if the hero was at the top of the screen, we wanted him to appear at the bottom. And that's exactly what this code does. But then notice, I said bottom of the screen. This is the X value. So if he's on the left-hand side, this code triggers and it puts him on the right-hand side. Well, then I fire off this method, fire screen transition. And what I want to do is I want to load up the screen that's to the west of where I currently was. This is the X value here. So this is if the hero's on the right-hand side. So this code right here will make him appear on the left-hand side, which means I want to fire this method off and then load up the screen that's to the east of where I was standing. Then these are the Y values. So if I'm going up, I want to load the screen that's to the north. And if I'm going down, I want to load the screen that's to the south. So we have to put these fire methods into our tick method in the section where the hero actually touches the edge of the screen. So pause the video and then go ahead and get this coded. Okay, now let's go back to the fire method. Let's look at what it does. Fire screen transition takes a direction, and then what it has to do is it has to go through the set, the listener set. Well, that's not going to be a big deal because we've only got one thing in there. So this is called an advanced for loop, and it says basically, okay, let's create a listener and let's go through the set of listeners. For each listener object we have in there, listener.screen transition. And what that's going to do is that's going to implement the screen transition method, which is already in the handler class. Remember, handler signed the contract. So handler was under obligation to implement screen transition. And now it will actually run this method. It'll remove the old screen, create a new screen, the correct screen, and pop that in. And so that gives me everything I need. It will pop that right into place. So let's just kind of do a review real quick. You need a Java file called HeroListener.java. It needs to look exactly like this. You need a Java file called HeroEvent.java. We're not using it in this section, but we will be using it maybe eventually. So it's a good to have. Okay. Then inside the hero class, you need to create a new instance variable, which is a set of hero listeners. Then, after you create that set of hero listeners, you have to go into the constructor for hero. And right after, I think after the catch statement here, you create or instantiate that object, which is the set of hero listeners. So at this stage of the game, it's empty right now. It's empty. There are no listeners in there. Okay? Then we have to have a way of adding listeners and removing listeners. So in the hero class, we create an add hero listener method, and we create a remove hero listener method. And we're going to create a fire screen transition method, which is going to be placed in the tick method for the hero class. That way, when the hero finally does reach the top or the edge of the screen, it fires off the screen transition method in the appropriate direction. That's all we need in the hero class to make that work. Now we go over to handler, who has agreed to implement the hero listener class. And so by the agreement, he's now obligated to implement the method, which is the screen transition method. Takes in the current screen, takes in the direction, creates an iterator to go through all the objects. Well, there's only one screen we're going to get rid of, so it will remove that screen. And then we consider the directions. So considering the direction we want the screen to load from, we change the current screen value. We then reset the current screen to whatever it should be now. We create a new screen based off of that, using all of this information right here. This is all using the one constructor for the screen class. And then we simply add that into the handler at the first position. Okay, then the last thing we need to do is we need to guarantee in the handler class that when we create a hero or when we add a hero object, we actually do create the listener. If we don't create the listener, all this code won't work. It just won't work. So we actually have to create the listener itself. So in these two methods, add object right here, we need to say create an if condition. If object ID equals player, that's the hero, and there's only one hero. Then we cast the object into a hero object, and then we add hero listener to this. So what it does is it adds the handler instance to the set in the hero class. The set is called listeners. So it adds the handler instance to that. So both of these have to be in the add object method. And one thing that I think is worth noting, if we happen to remove an object that is also a hero, so if object.id equals id.player, then we're under obligation to remove that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to cast that object to a hero, and then we're going to say remove hero listener this. And so what that's going to do is that'll remove the listener if we remove the hero from the screen. All right, that was a lot, wasn't it? If I haven't missed anything, and by the way, one last thing, change your height value to this, width divided by 12 times 9 minus 40. That's a quick fix. That should get rid of the black box or the black rectangle at the bottom of the screen. Now, if my video hasn't missed anything, okay, then we should get this kind of functionality. And there we go. Our hero is now walking over the world map. Once he hits the top, the old screen is removed, the new screen is created, and then popped into the object handler, the array list. And then this person forgot some values here, and I think the next one up above is blank. Yeah, we don't have the world finished yet. There's the marsh. Winter Wonderland right here. And there we go. All right. God bless you, wherever you are today.